Greetings, dear listener. Subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new scary stories and support me with a like. Enjoy listening.
I want to tell you my crazy story. That evening, as always, I took the subway home. It was a hard day at work and I had to stay late. I wanted to be home as soon as possible, make myself some strong tea and go to bed. Moreover, tomorrow is the weekend, and I won't have to go to work. There were few passengers in the carriage, several pensioners, a young girl, and an obese man in a business suit, almost taking up 2 seats with his bulk. Gradually, I began to feel sleepy, and after a couple of minutes, I fell asleep. However, they didn't let me sleep for long. A strange grinding sound was heard in the carriage, and I immediately opened my eyes. Looking around, I didn't notice anything that could make that sound. After listening, I realized that the grinding sound was coming from the outside of the car. It's like something is scratching the train's skin. The grinding sound was quite loud, but none of the passengers seemed to pay attention to it, as if I was the only one who heard it. I tried hard to ignore him, but it didn't work. The sound was so disgusting that even listening to it was torture, let alone trying to fall asleep to it. Suddenly, the girl, who had previously been sitting at the end of the car, stood up from her seat, headed towards me, and sat down to my right. Short, pretty, with black tousled hair and a jacket a couple of sizes too large. She sat silently for a while, staring at me. I felt somehow uncomfortable. The carriage is almost empty. There are plenty of seats. What did she want from me? "You can hear him, can't you?" she asked unexpectedly. "Who?" "Grinding." "From your reaction, I immediately realized that you heard." "Well, yes." "And what?" "Oh boy, you're out of luck." "No luck at all. God willing, if after this trip you stay alive—" Wait, I interrupted her. "I do not understand anything. Who are you? What kind of nonsense are you talking about? What does the grinding have to do with it?" "Look out the window," she answered sarcastically. And I looked. It would be better if I didn't do this. From the sight I saw, I jumped out of my seat and almost screamed in horror. There, outside the window, hell, I even find it difficult to describe what I saw. Most of all, it looked like a monstrous interweaving of tentacles, teeth, and jaws. This entire mass apparently wrapped itself entirely around the train. She was also the source of the grinding noise. Well, how? Liked? What is this? Come on, sit down, calm down, and I'll tell you everything in detail. And you better listen carefully, because your life depends on it. For some time, I simply looked in horror at the nightmarish sight outside the window. I just wanted to run away, as far as possible. But where can you escape from a moving train? Therefore, I had no choice but to follow the stranger's advice. When I returned to my seat, she began her story. "Listen, that means it is extremely rare that an anomalous phenomenon occurs in this metro at night. As you already understood, these are those jaws outside the window. Most people don't see or hear it, but there are exceptions like you and me. I myself don't know on what principle it works. Most likely this does not depend on us in any way. You and I are simply unlucky. You are unlucky to be those who see more than others. So it's dangerous? The jaws themselves are not. They are always outside the train and cannot get inside. It is not them that you should be afraid of. They are only a harbinger of impending disaster. And what trouble? There are strays on the train." "Strays?" "Well, yes, that's what I call them. A few minutes after the jaws appear, creepy creatures will begin to appear in the carriages. There is no point in talking about them for a long time. Remember only the most important thing. Do not let them understand that you see them. Don't look at them. Don't pay attention to them. Don't have any contact with them. They only attack those who can see them. If you pretend they aren't there, they won't pay attention to you. Got it?" "I think so." "Well, that's good. By the way, we never introduced ourselves to each other. My name is Sarah." "Victor." "Well, here's a little introduction. She didn't have time to finish. At this moment, the light in the carriage changed from the usual white to dark red, and the grinding seemed to become even louder. After being silent for a while, she said in a half-whisper, "It's begun." At that moment, they began to appear. Strays. To be honest, I almost shit my pants then. Scary, tall, and incredibly thin creatures. Their bodies were barely wider than my leg, and their limbs looked more like long, crooked branches. But what stood out most was their heads, disproportionately large for their bodies, perfectly round like bowling balls, with a single red eye on top. There was no mouth, no nose, no ears. Suddenly, a wild scream was heard in the carriage. The fat man sitting in the far corner of the car seemed to be one of the seers. The creatures that filled the carriage synchronously looked in his direction, after which, as if on command, they pounced on the defenseless victim. Having thrown him to the ground, they surrounded him on all sides. In a short impulse, I tried to jump out of the seat, try to help him, but Era stopped me, grabbing me by the shoulder with a strength unexpected for such a frail physique. She jerked me back down and hissed through her teeth, "Sit, and don't move, idiot." I'm having trouble with my head, so I decided to go after these creatures with my bare hands. "You can't save him. You'll only ruin yourself in vain." As unpleasant as it was to admit, she was right. What could I do to a dozen otherworldly creatures alone? That's right, nothing. Meanwhile, the screams began to become quieter until they finally died down. And when the strays dispersed, the man was there. He simply disappeared as if he had never existed. And what is noteworthy is that the pensioners sitting nearby did not react in any way to what was happening. It seems that not only the anomaly itself, but also everything that happens in it was invisible to them. One of the strays seemed to have noticed my movements and came almost close, boring me with his unblinking gaze. I froze in place and, trying once again not to move, silently looked somewhere to the side. It took me a lot of effort to remain calm. After some time, the creature lost interest in me and continued to wander aimlessly around the carriage. Barely holding back a sigh of relief, I looked at Sarah. She acted as if nothing strange was really happening around her. It was clear that this was not the first time she had encountered something like this. The next hours turned into hell for me. During this time, the train did not make a single stop. It was as if this damn tunnel had become endless. All this time, with an incredible effort of will, I tried to behave naturally. Each time it got worse. It is difficult to control yourself when bloodthirsty creatures are roaming around, ready to attack at any wrong move. I was sweating. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding like a machine gun. Never in my life have I been so scared. Add to this a heartbreaking, never-ending grinding sound. I wanted to just close my ears so as not to hear him, but I couldn't. Otherwise, I'll give myself away. Sarah seemed to be losing her nerves, too. It was clear from her, no matter how well she hid it. Unable to bear it, I still asked a question. "Listen, we've been driving for 2 hours already. During this time, we never stopped. Is this also the work of creatures?" "Yes, sometimes there are temporary anomalies. It's just, this time it's taking too long. And I don't like it." Time passed. The train continued to move. I think at that moment I was ready to go crazy. You could close your eyes and imagine that there were no creatures, but the grinding, there was nothing to drown it out. It penetrated straight into the soul and drove me crazy, and I couldn't do anything about it. The turning point came when I, finally unable to withstand the psychological pressure, grabbed my head and screamed at the top of my lungs at the entire carriage. Every person has a limit, and mine ran out long ago. I simply couldn't control myself anymore. Just like that time, all the creatures turned sharply in my direction. You can't even imagine how scary it is. Realizing too late what I had done, I was already mentally preparing for imminent death. But at that moment, the train finally stopped and the doors swung open, revealing a life-saving exit to the outside. Sarah, without wasting a second, jumped up from her seat and flew out of the damn carriage like a bullet. Hesitating a little, I rushed after her. The one-eyed freaks tried to stop us, but they stopped at the exit of the train, as if they had encountered an invisible wall. We ran until the metro station was far behind us. Having reached some park, we stopped to catch our breath. Having caught her breath, Sarah said with some kind of unhealthy laugh in her voice, "Well, how do you like the harsh Russian trains?" Never. Never in my life will I take the subway again. 2 months have passed since then. I must say, I kept my promise. Now I commuted to work exclusively by bus. Yes, it's long and it's inconvenient, but I'm ready to endure it. One such trip was enough for me for the rest of my life. After this incident, I had to regularly go to a psychologist in order to somehow come to my senses. By the way, we still communicate with Sarah in a purely friendly way. She continues to take the subway even now, despite all the horrors. I don't understand how she manages to do this. She's a completely frostbitten girl, but she's a pretty pleasant conversationalist. Life seems to have gotten better, but sometimes strange and disturbing questions gnaw at me. For example, could other public transport have its own jaws and strays? I've been here for more than 2 years and had zero problems until I started working overnight shifts in recent months, and now I'm seeing some shit. One story was me getting on an A train where there's often a crazy person here and there. Well, I sit down and no crazies in my car. However, at the very next stop, a crazy dude comes on and is immediately talking shit to people near him. Luckily, I wasn't near, so I didn't bother. Then, a few more stops later, another crazy guy comes on. Well, crazy recognized crazy, and they both start yelling at each other. The one who came on later pulled out a long screwdriver, and the first crazy proceeded to sit down while muttering. The scary part for me was that the dude with the long screwdriver was now pacing right near me, and at one point that screwdriver was about 3 feet from my face. I very subtly put my hands up near my face and neck as he kept muttering how he would kill the other guy until he finally got off. The second was just bizarre and unnerving. It was on one of the real cold nights in January. I get on the L going to Manhattan late at night and the car was mostly empty. Again, very next stop, a guy gets on wearing a plague mask. Look it up. So I'm thinking this guy is just a little weird, and luckily he's on the other side of the car. Well, the guy is pushing a cart and then takes out a scooter and starts riding it up and down the cart. He stops, then plops down in a seat towards the middle of the car, but still not near me. Then he gets up, pushes his cart around the car, then goes back to sit again. Then he gets up again and takes a seat right across from me. It was around this time that a couple of people were getting freaked out and going to another car during the stops. I decided to do the same because I still had several more stops, and I didn't want to think what the hell this dude was going to do next. The story has already happened to me personally. At a conscious age, approximately 21, 22 years old, I remember everything that happened down to the smallest detail. As I already indicated in the previous story, in those days, I lived in Moscow and wandered around rented apartments. At one point, I finally found a permanent rental housing option, and it was quite fun because I lived with 2 other friends. We lived happily, no matter what we did. No, well, of course they didn't break any laws and they didn't ruin anyone's life. We just had as much fun as we could and learned about the world around us with exorbitant speed, including the other world. At the same time, I discovered a new direction in music, heavy metal, etc. Well, and accordingly, the outer shell made up the attributes of the skin, that is, biker jacket, pants, belts, chains, boots in the shape of Cossacks, and of course a felt hat. Where would we be without her? By the way, the relic is still at home. So, all so beautiful and stern, I wandered around the many-sided Moscow, looking for brothers and sisters in mind, and she found it. This is so short so that you have a little idea about me. It will be needed in the future. On one of the beautiful spring but still slushy evenings, or rather nights, because it was quite late. I was returning from a party. The appearance described above, plus a weighty bag with books and videotapes. The metro was still open, but the passages, escalators, were no longer working. There were 2.5 cripples on the platforms. Trains were running at long intervals. Orange vests were scurrying back and forth with buckets and rags. In general, everything was getting ready to close. The train I was on stopped at the station I needed, Chekhovskaya, and then go to the Tverskaya station at the very end of the platform. Quiet, everything is calm. There are rare travelers on the platform. Someone is walking up the stairs to another station in the center of the hall. Someone is standing and waiting for the last train. Someone at the opposite end of the platform is walking up to the subway exit. I'm going to the transition to Tverskaya station, not bothering anyone. There is a heavy bag in his hands. I think my thoughts. I went to the crossing alone. With my peripheral vision, I notice a dark figure behind me, literally a meter away from me on the left side. Instant thought. Gopnik. His mother. People of this order tend to show their intellectual superiority and courage in front of others, and it doesn't matter who is in front of them. She clutched the bag with books and tapes tightly in her hands, preparing for defense. The attack did not take long to arrive. Immediately I felt how this helo, with all the stupidity, stepped on my foot, on the heel of my boot. So much so that I almost tripped and fell. Usually people of this breed do this intentionally, knocking the person off balance. Clutching the bag in my hands and swinging it, I instantly turned to face my opponent to repel the attack. I'm in a stupor. I scratch my turnip under my hat. The eyes widen. There's another thought in my head. What was that? Nobody here. Nobody came. Nobody ran away anywhere. The whole action happened in, well, maybe 3 seconds, not more. That is, almost instantly. In any case, not a single Gopnik, nor anyone else, could have galloped away from me unnoticed. From the outside, it looked something like this. A metalhead girl walks by, stops abruptly, turns around, swinging her bag, gasps and moves on. In general, then I got home without any special incidents. But bad luck. I discovered that on the boot where they stepped on my foot, the stabilizer was broken, and in addition, my heel hurt terribly. I heard one theory that your death always follows you to your left, a meter away. Here is what C. Castaneda writes about this. Death is our eternal traveling companion. She is always on our left at arm's length, and death is the only wise advisor that a warrior always has. Every time a warrior feels that everything is going very badly and he is on the verge of complete collapse, he turns to his left and asks his death if this is so. And his death answers that he is wrong and that, apart from her touch, there is nothing that really matters. His death says, "But I haven't touched you yet." I'm not asserting anything, and I'm not imposing anything on anyone. I just told what happened. If I've bothered anyone with my multi-booking, then call me. That's how it happened. I wanted, so to speak, to convey the whole atmosphere of what was happening. Well, and for your attention, of course, gratitude. One of my friends works in the metro, and it was he who told me this legend one day over a cup of beer. Subway workers, especially linemen, see a lot of strange and mysterious things. Huge rats no longer surprise anyone, nor do strange bloody scraps of clothing that are discovered every now and then. Sometimes they see ghosts in dungeons, but no one believes such stories for a long time, attributing them to the rich imagination of eyewitnesses. But something strange and inexplicable, quite creepy, is hidden in the oldest tunnels. You can see it between 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning, usually beyond the 200-meter mark. Ironic subway workers nicknamed this phenomenon The train, ridiculing this something in order to be less afraid of the unknown. And perhaps there is something to be afraid of. When the subway closes, trains stop running and the overhead rail is de-energized to allow linemen to move safely on the rails. Therefore, no trains move through the tunnels while the tunnel crews are working. However, more than once trackmen have seen how a bright headlight appears in the depths of the tunnel, very similar to the headlight of an old train or locomotive, emitting the characteristic noise of a moving train. Something is rapidly rushing towards people, forcing them to jump to the side from the rails. Anyone who hesitates without leaving the train's path disappears as if falling through the ground. Anyone who simply jumps off the tracks and presses himself against a wall or dives into a side branch of a tunnel often completely loses memory of what happened. Only if you step out of the train's path and close your eyes can you remember his appearance. However, of course, it is completely impossible to see where a delayed colleague has disappeared from the path. The trackmen found out all this empirically. Simply put, in each group of metro workers, one way or another, there were people who behaved differently when meeting something in the tunnel. Someone froze in fear in place and then disappeared without a trace. Some jumped away and closed their eyes, while others remained with their eyes open and saw everything that was happening, but lost their memory of it. In the course of discussions and conversation, this method was discovered by one young guy who, at the time of his encounter with the tunnel monster, had only been working in the subway for a month. It seems that the guy's name was Sasha, but no one remembers this anymore. He heard legends about the trainer, but did not believe them, mocking his colleagues. However, one day he also encountered either a ghost or an incomprehensible creature. Seeing the headlights of an approaching train in the tunnel, the guy got scared and did something completely unexpected. He raised his flashlight above his head and with a wild cry, "I'll crush you," ran towards the train. The tunnel, something disappeared before reaching the young metro worker about 5 meters, as if it had become frightened. In the light of his flashlight, Sasha was even able to see the train. He retained the memory of this meeting and told his colleagues what he saw. And he saw that behind the burning headlight, which on closer inspection resembled an eye, was hiding something dark, like smoke that had become dense and probably physically perceptible. The idiotic act of the young explorer became a good recipe, and from time to time those who were bolder and more reckless began to use it. Someone even tried to run closer to the train in this way in order to examine the mysterious creature. However, no one noticed anything other than what Sasha had already told. The train continued to disappear no closer than 5 meters before the man running towards him. Trackmen still sometimes disappeared and continued to disappear because of the train. But this happens very rarely, and the Metropolitan Management hides such cases. Who or what the train is, no one knows. Is this a ghost train? Or some mysterious ancient creature living underground? Where do the trackmen who come across the train's route go? There are many mysteries and questions. What do you think the tunnel something could be? The girl was traveling in a subway car late at night. Then she noticed that the woman sitting opposite was looking at her intently. This woman was sitting between 2 old men. The girl looked out the window, and when she turned around, she saw that the woman was not taking her gaze off her. This look began to frighten the girl. When the train stopped at the next stop, a tall man in a gray cloak entered the carriage. He sat down next to the girl. The woman did not pay attention to the man in the cloak. She just kept looking at the girl, who felt terrified by this look. And the 2 old men didn't even look in her direction. She pretended not to notice the woman's gaze, but every time she stole a glance at the woman, she noticed that she continued to look at her just as intently. When the train stopped at the next stop, the man in the raincoat stood up to get off. Suddenly, he grabbed the girl's hand tightly and, as the doors opened, dragged her out of the train. The doors of the carriage closed and the train left, leaving the girl on the platform, alone with the man in the raincoat. The girl started screaming for help. "Calm down," the man said. "I just saved your life. I don't want to scare you, but I had to pick you up from the train. The woman sitting opposite you was dead, and the two who were next to her were holding her.